makes a difference. You know,
Oh,
even
totally.
2,500, like, you know, just from the players that have been in that environment and gone from 0 to 2,500 or to 1,200, whatever the number is, they say you can immediately tell a difference. And to just add a little bit of juice, because, you know, we've talked about this flipping back and forth between games in the US and games in Canada. It feels like a different world. And I know that people in Canada are living in a different world, quite literally, than what's going on outside of the rink in the US. But the games, it's a different environment, different atmosphere. It doesn't even feel like the same sport sometimes.
No, no, not at all. The 2,500 fans is going to make a massive difference. And, you know, well, I think the thing is, though, I think it will ignite the Toronto Maple Leafs as much as Montreal, because it'll be the first time for both teams. Like, obviously, it'll be cheering for Montreal, but just hearing that noise and that energy. You know, I've talked to a lot of players, and they say when you hear that, and having not heard it for so long, like, obviously it's going to give some juice to Montreal, but I think in another way, it gives Toronto players a little juice because you just hear that atmosphere.
So you think Toronto closes it out in game 6?
Well, I think they're the better team. But so yeah, I will take Toronto. I think I said Toronto at the start of the series in 6, so I'll stick with Toronto.
I mean, look, they've dominated this series for stretches. You know, game
Yeah.
1, Montreal was opportunistic. Carey Price has been pretty good. Montreal struggled to score most of the series. And then what I really liked from Montreal in game 5 was the response. After blowing that lead, they could have easily packed it in. Hey, you know, this is it. Our season's over. We're going to overtime. Toronto's got the better offensive team. You know, they're the team that's been hounding us in shots. You know, they could have just folded like a cheap tent. They didn't. Obviously, opportunistic. You get a break 2-0, and that makes a difference. But still, I mean, they're to not have it end and sag so much that it ended in regulation, I think said something about the Habs.
Hey man, 3-goal leads. You want to avoid those at all costs, it seems, in the playoffs. Ask the Oilers, ask the Leafs, ask the man. There's lots of teams we can go through, but how about a 2-0 in overtime, man? I was racking my brain trying to think the last time I saw a 2-0 from the blue line. And
I
it was
mean,
crazy.
like those are the types of opportunities that even the players are so shocked that they usually miss the net or something
Yeah.
weird happens. Like to end up with a goal, it was almost like surprising as you were watching it.
We're going to have Tripp Tracy join us today as our guest to break down Carolina, you know, his brief time at CNN, also the Carolina Tampa Bay series, which is going to be electric. I can't wait to start that one. We do have Vegas, Minnesota. Does either team who wins have a chance against Colorado, Frank, or is
I think
Colorado
they
taking the
both
series
do.
regardless?
Well, I think they both have a chance. I mean, look, here's the other part about Colorado after coming off of that sweep, and we see this all the time. This is a long wait now. You know,
Yeah.
you're going to be approaching 10 days or something like that by the time you get back on the ice and play a game again. You get down in a hole against a team like Vegas, they don't need a lot of life, a lot of breathing room in order to compete. Those teams were neck and neck all season long in the standings. And I don't think Minnesota has gotten enough respect for how good they've been this year. They kept pace with those teams right until the bitter end. They were in the mix in the standings in the West. And so they've given Vegas all that they can handle. They've shown plenty of fight, certainly in game 6 to force a 7. And they've controlled the season series against Vegas. So I think Vegas is better equipped to face off against Colorado, but I wouldn't take anything away from either team.
Little bit of a quiet time for non-playoff teams right now, although it's going to heat up when we get to June, and especially with July, the expansion draft and the draft, and then of course free agency. Ken Holland came out and, you know, pretty straightforward and saying, yeah, very high possibility that there's going to be a buyout in Edmonton.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, there's two obvious choices. You got James Neal, who you can buy out. He's got 2 years remaining. So if you buy him out, you would save 3.83 million for the first 2 years, but then you'd have dead cap space of 1.9 for the following 2 years. And, you know, if people look at like a 5-year window, those final 2 years are when you would think in theory, Edmonton should be a legit cup contender. And dead cap
Should
space
be
is not
before
ideal.
that, by the way.
Well, no,
Okay.
I know, but you're just talking
Yeah.
for those 2 years before. But, you know, like Edmonton's got to win a playoff series, right? That's maybe next year. Then the year after, maybe go conference final. We'll see. It's never a straight trajectory. We see that. Like Chicago's kind of the rarity. But you got also Mikko Koskinen, who he's only got 1 year. So if you buy him out, you save 3 million this year, and then you have 1.5 of dead cap space. So as a big non-proponent of dead cap space, I see more sense in Koskinen because of the long-term ramifications. It's only 1 year of dead cap space. And, you have 3 million saved with him. It's 3.8 with Neal. It's kind of the same. But James Neal, you do it for 2 years. Which one would you do and why?
I would do James Neal. I just think getting that extra 3 million now, I know that we have a better window now, especially if you're doing buyouts with the way the cap is structured in the CBA, knowing that it's not going to change much. It's not like you're buying James Neal out and you're hoping that the cap increases to the point where it sort of wipes out whatever his dead cap hit is. But I think with his hit and where he is at 5+ million, and also sort of the lack of production value that he brings, that 3 million that you save right off the hop, I think can help get you a player that could, move the needle a little bit in your middle six. And I'd be willing to take the long-term ramifications of that because when you get further out in your cap window, there's other contracts that are then expiring that also make that dead cap space a little bit easier to deal with. So I think with Koskinen, I bite the bullet for a year. If I determine that he's a fine third goalie, I'd bury his cap hit in the minors for the year, save the 1.1 million, and knock that down to just under 3.5, and then not have to be stuck with that extra year of dead cap space the following year. Bite the bullet and just get through the Koskinen deal. And it's still like, Jason, like it blows my mind that Peter Chiarelli was able to sign Mikko Koskinen. Was it 72 hours or 48 hours before being fired? Like it's just like, how does that happen?
Yeah. And you know what? Like people in Edmonton like to use Chiarelli as a scapegoat. I'm sorry. Your organization allowed that. There's, when your GM's signing that, unless it's carte blanche and the GM makes announcements and no one else in the organization knows about it, that to me, because if you're assistant GM or somebody's got to sign, you got to put in the proper paper. That'd be somebody else who knows to just say, hey, wait a sec. Like,
yeah, but he was given autonomy, and that's the way the autonomy is supposed to work, is you're supposed to have someone in your president of hockey ops that you trust to be making the right decisions. And time again, he made every wrong decision possible. We need, as the league's going faster and lighter, we need to get bigger and heavier. Huh?
Oh yeah.
How does that work? And then we go with look back to 2017, that series we talked about last week against the Ducks. When you have the erosion of talent that you've had with that group, and you take Jordan Eberle and you trade him for Strome, and then you trade Strome for Spooner, who's not even in the league anymore. Like you get crushed. So you got Eberle, who was in your lineup in the series against Anaheim, and also Pat Maroon, who now can become the first player in NHL history to win three straight Stanley Cups with two different teams. No one's ever done it. You take two pieces like that out of your group, and you're down with four really impactful forwards that you have in your lineup. You've got McDavid, Draisaitl, Puljujarvi, and Nugent Hopkins, and that's it.
Oh, well, hey, yeah, go even further. Yeah, like sure, if you're doing the whole encompassing of Chiarelli, like it's a great debate on which was the worst trade, right? Usually you want to have debates on which was the best, but you could have the worst. And as bad as the Strome for Spooner trade was, it's still not the worst. The worst trade was the Griffin Reinhart trade. You gave up a first rounder and a second rounder for a guy who wasn't even a top pairing defenseman in the AHL that season. Like that is unforgivable.
And you didn't even mention Hall and Larson.
Yeah, you don't have to take. Well, Larson at least plays, right? So that's the one thing. At least you have something to show.
So that's the baseline. It's like, oh, he plays. That's good. He plays.
That's why I'm saying it's not the worst. It's not ideal, but it's not the worst. The worst was the Reinhart trade. You got absolutely nothing for 2 picks, and you didn't have to take Matt Barzal. You could have taken Kyle Connor. You could have taken Thomas Chabot. Heck, Eriksson Ek would be a massive upgrade. There were so many players available. Travis Konechny, go down the list of guys they could have taken at that spot. Like, imagine Kyle Connor with Connor McDavid. Like, are you joking? So yeah, trust me, I'm not defending Chiarelli. I just think the timing of the Koskinen deal, the organization must have known he was on thin ice. And it wasn't be like, oh, now he signed Koskinen, we're going to fire him. Like, unless he just.
And what had Koskinen done to that point to deserve that kind of number?
Dude, it was the worst. I was on holidays in Maui when it happened. Jason Strudwick was hosting my show. He called me and he's like, yeah, we need to get you on. And I'm like, dude, I'm on holidays. He's like, they signed Koskinen. I'm like, yeah. for 4.5 mil. I'm like, oh, for how many years? 3. And I thought he meant like total 4.5. I'm like, oh, 1.5. That's pretty good contract. He goes, no, per year.
Oh
It
my
was
God. You're like, okay,
unbelievable.
I'm on the line.
Oh God, it was unreal. So yeah, no, that was a terrible deal. So the buyout, you take Neil, and I get the Neil, it's 3.8. I do see though, because I don't think this team trusts Koskinen. At the end of the day, he lets in soft goals at the most inopportune time. He can play well for a while.
How could you trust him? I mean, like he showed he was given the ball to start this year.
Yeah.
Mike Smith starts the year on LTIR. They say, Mikko, this is your team. Go run with it. And they were 6 and 7 by the time Smith got in the lineup.
Yeah.
Smith changed their season.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. Hey, let's get to buy or sell with producer Ty. Ty, how you doing, my man?
I am fantastic, Jason. Did you guys remember to reference Koskinen has a no trade clause as well? So if the Oilers want to trade him, they need his permission as well.
Well, he's got 15 teams.
Yeah, 15 teams no trade.
He's got a partial no trade, but still, yeah, that's even better, right? Hey, guy, you've never been a full season in the NHL. Here's a partial no trade clause. Unreal.
Pete Chiarelli would have given me a no trade clause, and I didn't even work for the organization. Buy or sell brought to you by Jock Market. Stay in the game. It's a hybrid between fantasy sports and the stock market. We got our promo code DFO50, gets you a $50 deposit bonus. We're going to start with sort of a head-to-head question here in buy or sell. It's going to be the Canes versus the Lightning. If you had to buy or sell on one star heading into this series, would it be Sebastian Aho or Nikita Kucherov? Frank, which one you buying on?
I'm going to go with Aho. Pretty consistent playoff performer. I know that when we had our media hacks playoff pool draft, Aho was my first selection. And so I'm going to stick with Aho.
I'll go Kucherov. He's guy's rested, comes back, and man, when he's on that power play, it's almost unstoppable. So I will take Kucherov.
You guys touched on this a little bit earlier on in the podcast, but the idea that the Colorado Avalanche have been sitting for a while, and some would say that too much rest would create rust. Do you buy or sell the idea that the Avalanche could be rusty heading into their playoff series against either Vegas or Minnesota? Jason?
Well, I'm selling because I expect that series is going to start either Sunday or Monday, right? So they last played on Monday. That's like a bye week in a normal regular season. I think they're rested. I think they'll be fine. Like, if there's rust, it might be in the first period, and then it's gone after that. And Nathan McKinnon, man, the guy was averaging 2.25 points. He has 9 points in 4 games. Like, him and Rantanen are just on fire right now. So if the rust is there, it's about as long as the hair on my head, which isn't very much. So it won't be long to see McKinnon and Rantanen dominate.
Yeah, I'm going to buy the rust factor. And I think you're right, though, Jason, that it doesn't last very long. But still, if it lasts enough in game one that it's an impact and either Vegas or Minnesota has an edge to start the series, I don't know that it's going to make that big of a difference overall, because Colorado is going to have plenty of runway to get back into it. So I think they're in fine shape, but I do think there is a rust factor for sure.
The Boston Bruins will be going up against the New York Islanders. Boston could arguably be the hottest team in hockey. Islanders coming off a big win over the Penguins. I'm going to say Bruins in 6 or earlier. Buying or selling on that, Frank?
Selling.
Okay.
I think not you, but everyone continues to underestimate the New York Islanders at their own peril. I mean,
I know I do.
I had Pittsburgh winning that first round series. Barry Trotz, all the man does is win in the first round. And guess what? He won in the second round last year with the Islanders too, getting them to the Eastern Final. I just think they find a way to, if not win the series, push it pretty deep.
Oh, 6 or less, I'll buy on that all day long. I like Boston over Washington. The Islanders aren't going to get the gift goals from Tuukka Rask that they got from Tristan Jarry in the first round. I agree that Trotz gets the most out of his team all the time, but the Bruins are rolling. Their top 2 lines are really good. And Jake DeBrusk is now in their bottom 6, and he's been really good. Like, that's an excellent production guy in the bottom 6, and Charlie McAvoy. So I'll take the Bruins under in 6 and under all day.
Just to offer a little rebuttal here, to flip one thing you said on its head, in the same way, the Bruins are not going to get the easy goals that they had on the Caps with the way that Ilya Sorokin's been playing. So I don't know.
Fair enough.
Well, what if Varlamov's in there? Trust me, he's gifted.
Sorokin is going to be in net the way that he played in that series.
Yeah.
Speaking of Tristan Jarry, the Pittsburgh fan base is not too happy with what they got from their goaltending. You can understand why. I'll say Pittsburgh will have a new starting goaltender in that organization by the start of next season. Jason, buying or selling?
Nah, I would sell on that big time. I think the Penguins, you know what's funny? Go back to Tristan Jarry, go back to 13-14, Marc-Andre Fleury's save percentage. Jarry was still better this year. Hey, Jarry's a young goaltender, and you know what? It's 6 games. He, I would give him the puck in overtime 100 times. I don't think he's serving up a pizza like he did to Josh Bailey again, right? Like, he's a really good puck mover. So I will, Tristan Jarry will be back in Pittsburgh. I don't have much doubt about that.
I'm buying. Tristan Jarry will be back. I just don't think it'll be as the starter. I think they're going to bring someone else in to, if not challenge, then to play in tandem. I think the way that this season played out, the lack of confidence, you could see that bench sag, you could see the team sag. He looked like a man that was pleading to get out of the net. And the fact that Casey DeSmith was hurt put them in a tough spot and left it all on Jarry. But I still think that you have to make some sort of decision this summer to bring someone else in.
Any names you think that might interest them? Too soon to tell?
Yeah, too soon to tell because there's going to be so much in play with the expansion draft.
Yeah, fair enough. The last buy or sell question, we got 2 teams that were bounced in the first round, the St. Louis Blues and the Washington Capitals. If you had to buy stock on one of these teams moving into next season, which one has the brighter future? Are you buying on Washington or are you buying on St. Louis? Frank?
I'm buying on Washington. I still think that group, people look, and the question with both teams was, with the number of first round exits that they've had both before and now after winning their Stanley Cup, was the cup a fluke? And I think, it's too hard to win. I think it's unfair to say to any team that it's a fluke to get 16 wins in a postseason. And I think with Washington, with the changes that they've already made up front, moving out Vrana, they're going to be moving out Kuznetsov. They're going to reinvent themselves a little bit. I think their back end is stronger. I think their goaltending is stronger. Jordan Binnington, 0-9 in career playoff starts since winning the Stanley Cup. And their defense really took a hit this year in St. Louis, and so much change and influx coming at forward with St. Louis for the team that's gotten a little long in the tooth. I think I'm going to go with Washington.
Oh yeah, I would take the Caps for sure. I like their team. St. Louis, you know what? They're such a different team than when they won the Stanley Cup, specifically on the back end. And no Pietrangelo, no Edmondson. Jay Bouwmeester was an excellent defender who just, he didn't say much at all, but man, he played. He was just, you never noticed him because he rarely made a mistake. And the guys were all huge. I just think that's a tough loss for the Blues. They'll be a competitive team next year. They're going to be in a tough division, though. The Central will be a very tough division next year. But I take Washington all day. I think there's a really good chance the Blues might not make the playoffs next year unless they make a significant change in the offseason. And I wonder what they do with some of their free agents.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting offseason in both those markets. That is Buy or Sell, brought to you by Jock MKT. Stay in the game at jockmkt.com. The hybrid between fantasy sports and the stock market. Get involved for the second round of the playoffs and use that promo code DFO50.
Awesome. Well, Frank, let's get to our big guest today. Tripp Tracy, a longtime analyst and guy's a really good storyteller. And the thing I like about Tripp is he'll give you his opinion.
Our next guest is a proud Michigan native, a graduate of Harvard University, and for the last 20 plus years, he's been one of the voices of the Carolina Hurricanes, a huge part of the fabric of their culture of that franchise. And he's also the host of the Dig In with Tripp podcast. Please welcome to the DFO Rundown, Tripp Tracy. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Frank. It's been a very enjoyable experience for you and I to become friends like we have, thanks to our mutual friend, Kevin Shady 80 Weeks. And it's great to be with you today.
So let's start here. It's Friday morning. It feels like the Carolina Hurricanes just ended their game against the Nashville Predators in overtime. I'm sure you had trouble getting some sleep after seeing the video that surfaced on social media. Rod Brind'Amour wishing his dad happy birthday. I know you know the Brind'Amour family so well. What was that like watching that clip and seeing the players react to that celebration in the locker room?
It's everything that's spectacularly special about Rod Brind'Amour. Yeah, I mean, he is my closest friend in the organization. I did walk his mom, Linda, down the aisle when he got married here in Carolina to his current wife, Amy. And Bob Brind'Amour is a bigger than life personality. He's had some health concerns for several years now. It has not at all dampened his spirit. He is he's very different than Rod. I mean, Linda, his mom, is much more like Rod, but Bob is the life of any party. Way back on the front lines of the first dad's trip, not just in Carolina, but really right there in the NHL. Peter Laviolette was the coach. Bob Brind'Amour was the mayor of the dad's trips. Bob and Linda live in Campbell River Island, as you know, just west of Vancouver. So with COVID, Rod hasn't been able to see his mom and dad. And Bob and I have become very close. I dated a French Vietnamese woman years ago, and she came to Raleigh, and Bob and Linda happened to be at the game, and she learned English from me, and I needed somebody that could speak French with her to sit and watch the game. And it was Bob. And Bob sat there and told her the entire game in the lower bowl, two things. Number one, why are you dating Tripp? Why aren't you should be dating one of these players? And then he kept pointing up to Rod's, jersey number 17 retired in the rafters. He was legendary when he went over with, among others, Carl Lindros and Ron Iserman, Steve Iserman's father, in Nagano. They had some real fun in '98. And he's quick to tell me whether I have pheromones or not, depending on what stage I'm at in life. And he is Rod, like if we're lucky enough to say we have the greatest mother and father that there is, I know I can say it. I know Rod can say it. And Linda and Bob Brind'Amour, Frank, have made my life infinitely better. So that made that passionate, emotional video after Sebastian Aho's overtime winner that much more special.
What does it say, Tripp, about the environment? The word culture is thrown around so often, but I think sometimes it doesn't ring true in certain markets, certain teams, within the walls of their group. But I think here, in Carolina, it feels different. What does it say about what Rod has built there? Really from the ground up, starting as player, captain, assistant, coach, then now to having this, be the guy that everyone looks towards?
Frank, it's such a great question because you take it all the way back. St. Louis Blues draft pick, but then a guy that is immensely popular in Philadelphia, what he gave to that great organization to this day. I mean, I remember when he made the draft pick in Ron Francis's first draft as general manager in 2014 in Philly. And he was the only guy that not only didn't get booed, I mean, they applauded through the roof for Rod. So I mention that because I can distinctly remember looking down at warmups after he got traded. He was getting ready for a game with the Flyers in Pittsburgh, found out from Paul Holmgren. And at that point, he comes to Carolina. I think the Canes were playing Montreal, and I looked down and, there's nobody in the building. There's no atmosphere. And I'm thinking, what must he be thinking right now? So for Rod, all these years later, leading the team to a Stanley Cup, would have made a great argument along, because Cam Ward won it, but to be a Conn Smythe winner. I think he's a Hall of Famer as a player. I hope that I know what he's achieving in coaching is a different category, but maybe at least increases the conversation. But what he did as a player, and then got to a point, and this is what is, I think, most special for the Hurricanes organization, where he thought of and thinks of himself as a Carolina Hurricane. And that is such a tribute to the Hurricanes based on what the Flyers meant to him and how, in what regard I hold. Frank, I lost you for a second because guess who was just calling and I had to scream? Rod.
There you go.
So, he has Carolina Hurricanes DNA. He bleeds Carolina Hurricanes blood. And then I thought about after he retired, I know he would have preferred to go in management. He elected to start, he put his toe in the water with Kirk Muller because he's a father above anything else. There's sort of an eye in the sky, extra coach. Johnny McLean was running the forwards. And I could just tell this is going to be an exceptional coach. I remember being on the plane one day and I was sitting with the great Chuck Caden. And Jimmy Rutherford came back, where the pre-board food was. And he turned to Chuck and I and he pointed to Rod and he goes, he's going to be a great coach someday. And what he did is he knew that he had to turn video into a strength because he hated video as a player. I loved hearing from Peter Laviolette, Kevin McCarthy, when they yanked Rod in to look at video, and it was like pulling teeth. So he knew he had to make that a strength. And then all of the things that make him a leader, all the things that make him selfless, all of the things that make him a person that whoever is around him, that they will swim the oceans for. Those are intangibles that I just don't think other coaches have in spades like he does. So all of these factors, it's not surprising at all for me to see him having the success that he has. I think you'd be hard pressed, really, maybe even ever in the game, to see more of a similar captain and coach in personality and position, the way they played the game, the way they approach life with the epitome of class. And it's just, it's a Carolina Hurricanes organization that could not be more fortunate to have the type of character as your head coach and, of course, as your captain, and Jordan Staal to be the faces of your organization.
Tripp, you've been around the organization a long time, and you go back to the early 2000s, and they're making Stanley Cup final appearances, and then they're out of the playoffs, and then they win the Stanley Cup, and then they're out of the playoffs, and then they go to the conference final. Like, it was like all or nothing, real feast or famine for that team. But the last few years, like, they've changed. And I look at the Carolina Hurricanes, they got the storm surge. Like, they're very different than other NHL teams. They seem to have a little bit more fun. They seem to eliminate the stuffiness sometimes that maybe goes with the NHL. Their Twitter, their social media is one of the best in the league. And obviously they're a very good team on the ice. What changed in that transition of the Hurricanes? Because it seemed like they had that winning culture and it would kind of go away, and then all of a sudden they'd have a great year and then it would go away. But now it seems more embedded. How come?
Rod. I mean, it's strange for me to say that because the players are the guys they're the performers. They have to go out and play. And Rod would be the first thing to say it's all about them. And hey, listen, you can't win and you can't punch a playoff ticket for 3 consecutive years in a parity-driven National Hockey League when it's hard to make the playoffs. Really hard. I know, because 10 years without the playoffs gives you a black belt in how to grow as a credible announcer in this league. And so there's nobody that's enjoying this more in calling much easier games than the 10. I mean, any announcer and an analyst that can get 10 through 10 years of not making the playoffs, hopefully maintain credibility and objectivity and not get fired. I mean, that's tough. And so, but Rod, the first day that he got the job, he did 2 things. He raised the level of expectation and said, our expectation is to win the Stanley Cup. Every team says it, but it hadn't really been said by the previous regime. And then the second thing was he quickly amended a tough decision, a poor decision of the previous coach and Bill Peters, and naming co-captains and Jordan Staal and Justin Falk at the time when he had Justin Williams, a 3-time Stanley Cup champion. Rod, maybe his favorite winger of his entire career was Justin Williams. So he made that adjustment, made Justin captain, raised the bar of expectation. The team has been witness to a lot of excellent things that Ron Francis did, drafting and developing players patiently so, and then an attacking nature of being aggressive and making deals. I think that's Don Waddell's signature mark. Tom Dundon, after he bought the team, wanted the Hurricanes to become relevant again. We are in the entertainment business. So I think that's where Tom has made his most positive impact with regards to the things you mentioned in social media. The surge was player driven. I loved it right from the get-go. You want to break down the boards and the glass and really have no barrier with your fans. You have a very unique fan base here in Carolina. And I think for all of these reasons, the Hurricanes have been consistently relevant in the league. They now have a flat out Stanley Cup challenging team to the point where they are equipped. They fought for home ice with Tampa. Tampa's rolling on all cylinders. They are equipped to go toe to toe with the Tampa Bay Lightning in a pick'em series when I look at every position.
Oh, it's going to be a monumental clash. And I think you maybe, unlike a lot of guys, can talk very in depth about the goaltending position, of course, because that's where you played at Harvard. Goaltending for non-goalies, at times I joke it's like it's voodoo, because we see so many goalies. Like Nedeljkovic was on waivers and no one claimed him. So that means there's no team that thought that this guy was going to become this dominant. How come? Like, why is he so good? And did you see this, or is this even a surprise for you as a goalie?
Yeah, I got a call in. It would have been. I'm trying to remember exactly when it was in 2012, because I grew up in the Detroit area, and I had played junior hockey before I went to college with a guy named Mark Felucci, and his brother Mike Felucci would come back from playing pro and skate with us. So I knew Mike, and Mike went on to be the coach and general manager of Plymouth Whalers. Came to Carolina, assistant GM, coached the American League team to a Calder Cup, is in Pittsburgh right now with Mike Sullivan. And so I knew Mike Felucci and know him quite well. And he called me in 2012, right after the OHL entry draft. And he said, Tripp, you're going to want to keep an eye on this guy, Ned. He's got it. And Mike and I, our relationship, Pete Karmanis, our longtime majority owner, watched a ton of Plymouth games, always did, because he lives 10 minutes away in Detroit. He also made note of Alex Nedeljkovic, watching him, seeing him with the Whalers. So when those two people, and I've always loved the way that Pete Karmanis and Mike Felucci see the game, he was instantly on my radar. So I tracked him. And then I remember his first start in Vancouver, where John Forson and I were calling the game at the time. In our 20 plus years together, I don't know if the Canes had won a game in Vancouver. And that was the year that they had the big second half to get back in the playoffs, the first of these three now playoff appearances. And Nedeljkovic showed evident self-belief and swagger right from the get-go, especially with his willingness to play the puck. And then the biggest thing for me was his first start this season. He lost in Columbus. I called him the next day just to check in and tell him, hey, I thought your body language was quite good, even though you lost the game. And that's when he said to me, Tripp, I will dominate in this league. Oh. And I'm inside as the analyst. I'm like, all right, Ned, I'm going to make an executive decision here not to use this, but now I can. And you can't teach that type of belief. You can't. I can tell you, it's what put me on the Autobahn to the TV booth, because I had doubt. That's how I can tell. I have belief as a broadcaster that unfortunately I didn't have, getting the nickname The Great Guesser. He has that alpha belief. Peter Mrazek has it too. James Reimer is more of a really good backup goaltender with his personality, who's been a very fine Hurricane. But when I look at it, Alex, he was the right decision based on the way that things went at the end of the regular season, even though I think Rod would have loved to have started with his guy, because Rod's that loyal in Mrazek. But it was the right decision to start with Nedeljkovic. If he had struggled, you could have gone to Mrazek, him against the world, something to prove. You still can against Tampa, because it may require two goaltenders to match and exceed a goaltender of the stature of Andrei Vasilevsky. But Alex Nedeljkovic, he has the mental psyche and what you need between the ears to now go toe-to-toe with Andrei Vasilevsky. From a mechanical standpoint, he's doing a far better job. of staying on his feet as a longer goaltender. And if he drops to his knees, his hands attack the puck. That was very evident to me in the clinching game in Nashville last night. That's the big mechanical improvement he's made for me. His hand position, specifically his glove, establishing the high portion of the net and remaining on his feet when you have to have the courage to put yourself in position to get hit. Once upon a time, Artur Zerbe, way back when, impressed me in a Stanley Cup run doing just that. He's been quite a story. I wish I could say it's a surprise, but going back to 2012, he genuinely and earnestly has been on my radar.
Tripp, if people are watching on YouTube, they can see your hat, and your podcast is so aptly named because the Hurricanes brought their shovel to play against Nashville. What they had to wade through, I called it the muck, like it was the swamp to get to the net. What do you make of what's coming the Hurricanes' way with the stylistic change now in facing a team like Tampa? It's not going to be that same style.
Frank, first of all, because it's Friday now, I'm hearing that the game one's going to be Sunday. Mm-hmm. So you can savor last night's victory and the series win and relish it, I think, through today. And then think about Tampa. So in doing both for you, you look at the last many Stanley Cup champions. Tampa might be an exception, although they had that ridiculously long overtime game with Columbus in the first game of the first round, if you want to categorize that as adversity. When you look at teams that eventually win, Frank, so many of them, if not the majority of them, face major adversity in the first round. I mean, I look at Carolina when they won, dropped the first two games at home to a very good Montreal team. They weren't generating anything, down 1-0 in the third period. I mean, nothing. I remember calling that game. Cam Ward, a rookie making his first playoff start, was the reason they were in the game. And Rod Brind'Amour just willed one in on a pass from Brett Hedican. The stick came together as Rod with Craig Rivet, and the puck just squibbled between the legs of a red-hot Cristobal Huet. That changed everything. That was adversity, Frank. The Hurricanes rolled off 4 straight. You look at Boston when they won the Cup. And beating Vancouver. They dropped the first 2 games to Montreal on home ice. Washington dropped the first 2 games to Columbus when they won the Cup. So the adversity that usually is there in the first round, it showed itself differently, but Nashville absolutely provided it. Not surprising at all, because Nashville is a flat out darn good team. If people didn't recognize that, they weren't watching what they did in the second half of the regular season. So to lose 2 consecutive double overtime games, to lose your most important skater, in my view, in Jacob Slavin after game 1 until game 5, to be down in game 5 in the third period, when I think the Predators were playing a brand of hockey that they felt they had the series in their grasp. Rod was very vocal on the bench saying, are we going to waste everything that we've invested in this to go away quietly? And that's when Marty Necas made a play. And Jordan Stahl ended in overtime. And then even in the adversity last night in Nashville, down a couple of goals for the first time in the series. So that adversity, now that they've gotten through it, will serve them well. It will give them even more belief. It will make them even more galvanized. How do they beat the Stanley Cup champions rolling on all cylinders for me? I believe now that it looks like Slavin's health is getting better, and at least for now, it looks like he's good to go. I think the blue lines match each other. Pesce and Shea in particular had tremendous first rounds in Slavin's absence. Dougie Hamilton, candidly, just okay. But he digs in and scores the tying goal in game 6. How does he build off of that? So I look from top to bottom. I know you have Hedman there. I think that these are 2 blue lines that cancel each other out with eliteness. If Nedeljkovic and or Mrazek can outplay Andrei Vasilevsky in however many games it goes, 6, 7 in all likelihood, that's a factor. And then Carolina's power play that was number 1 for a lot of the year. We know that Tampa's power play is a thing of beauty right now with Kucherov and Stamkos back. And good to go. So can Carolina match the Tampa power play? If those things happen, match their goaltending, match their power play, Carolina, Frank, had a decided edge in the middle of the ice. They're so much improved. They've lost to the Boston Bruins and been eliminated the last couple of playoffs because they haven't been strong enough and deep enough in the middle. And Aho, Jordan Staal is a different hockey player this year. Vincent Trocheck has been a different hockey player this year. And whether it be Steven Lorenz or Cedric Paquette, the former Tampa Bay Lightning forward, comes in. I do think, even against Tampa, 1-4, the way that Aho played with 5 goals in the first round, Jordan Staal was as good as any player for anybody in the first round with 4 goals and all big ones. Trocheck had 2. There's still more there for him. And the dynamic nature of a guy like Steven Lorenz, a big guy that can skate and can play with appropriate bite. That remains the one area, Frank, that I think the Hurricanes have a slight edge. And the center ice position. It's not as decided as it was in the Nashville series, because Nashville has really been looking for a true franchise center for their entire existence. But that's where Carolina, if they can match those other areas, can beat Tampa with home ice and move on.
So you said something, Tripp, that caught my ear. You said Jacob Slavin is Carolina's most important skater, which is a pretty significant opinion given the fact that I gave Dougie Hamilton a Norris vote. And you've got Aho and the impact that he's had this year. Jordan Staal was on my Selke ballot. You know, what makes Jacob Slavin such a difference maker for this team when he's healthy?
Because the lineup looks entirely different when he's not playing. With regards to defensive depth, people have been talking about the Hurricanes' defense and it being their strength for several years. I think that it's their strength up top. But all of a sudden you lose a guy like Slavin, you know, the depth is not exactly where I would love it to be. The depth up front is outstanding. It is way better than it was 2 years ago when they went to the conference finals. They can roll 4 lines. They got a couple of guys that if you had injuries can jump in there and make an impact and you don't miss a beat. The goaltending, you have 3 guys that give you a chance to win. Dougie Hamilton is, in his Carolina tenure, this is what Dougie Hamilton, at this point, I think you almost have to say this is what he is. He is an offensive defenseman who has enjoyed a few stretches where he's been serviceable defensively, but I don't know that I've ever seen him elite defensively and play with snarl defensively. You could make the argument before he broke his leg last year, and it would be a very sound argument, that he was playing the most complete hockey of his career and a true Norris Trophy candidate, Frank. This season, even when he had that 14, 15, however many games it was, that point streak,
14
games, he was offensive, but I'm going to tell you, there were holes defensively. It's my job. That's my job. He's, in terms of his all-around value, but he does things that you cannot teach that change games. He had a very rough series. Really, his roughest game was game 4, where he was a component of all 4 goals against. He bounced back, but didn't get rewarded in game 5. And then last night was a little bit of a mixed bag. And then he makes the play on a set face-off play to tie the game. But who's the guy not known for his offense that makes the play? On the tying goal, jumping down from the strong side point, saucer pass through Jeannot's legs to find Dougie Hamilton? Jacob Slavin. Who gets into the net on Aho's series winner? Jacob Slavin. Who is, you know, when it comes to who are your best defensive defensemen on the Carolina Hurricanes, this is the ranking. Slavin and Pesce it's a coin toss. And then whichever one, how you go 1-2 there defensively, then it is Brady Shea, then it's Dougie Hamilton. Okay, so how you define what the Norris Trophy is, if it is a defensive defenseman first and, you know, and then offensive production, I mean, Slavin doesn't check both those boxes, but as defensive defenseman on the Carolina Hurricanes, it's Slavin, it's Pesce, it's Shea, and then Hamilton. But with that being said, Dougie Hamilton could use what happened in game 6 to be a springboard to outplay the likes of Hedman, McDonough, Sergachev, probably the strongest left side in hockey, Frank. And what Dougie does have that a guy like Victor Hedman has that only a few guys do is the ability to turn a game on its ear. Jacob Slavin can flourish in the lineup with or without Dougie Hamilton. That's why he's the most important skater. Dougie Hamilton, until proven otherwise, needs Jacob Slavin.
Tripp, I love your in-depth analysis and honesty. So a lot of people watching because Dougie Hamilton's a pending UFA. Do you see him re-signing in Carolina, or do you think he's going to test the market?
I just don't know, and I haven't given it truthfully a ton of thought right now. I just, when I look at, I had a great conversation with somebody. It was actually with Pete Carmanis earlier this year. And, he's a big advocate for Dougie Hamilton. And he said, and I'm very at times critical of Dougie on television just because I feel like he can be elite in all of these categories, defensively, physically, and then all the things that you just can't teach and you can't duplicate offensively. But Pete aptly and appropriately said to me, he said, well, are you critical of Slavin when things don't come naturally for him offensively? And I said, no. And he said, well, then should you be critical of Hamilton if the occasional mishap is there defensively? And that's a very good question that he posed. He's a Hall of Famer. But when I look at how I define a Norris Trophy candidate, I know it's changed, but it is an all-around dominating defenseman. And that's what Dougie was last year before he broke his leg. That's not what he's been this year. He has historically had moments in the playoffs both ways. So when you ask about the summer, here he's going toe-to-toe, coming right up. Coming off of a big-time goal and an eventual overtime win in Game 6. And he's going toe-to-toe with Hedman, with McDonough, with Sergachev. I'll tell you, if he outplays Victor Hedman, which he's capable of doing in a Carolina victory, then that drives his value up in the offseason. But I'll tell you, if he does, it's going to be because of the built-in ancillary support and the unsung elite work of Jacob Slavin. And I think we saw when Jacob Slavin was out of the lineup how much Jacob Slavin has meant as a centerpiece to the success of Dougie Hamilton.
One last one for me, Tripp. I know that when you graduated Harvard, you briefly worked at CNN before going to the Carolina Hurricanes. So let's roll back a few years and let's assume that Tripp Tracy stays at CNN. What would have been your ideal gig to do at CNN?
Well, I got called up my second year playing for a cup of coffee in the NHL. It was a shot of espresso. And, I backed up, but I didn't play. And, the Hurricanes offered me another contract, but I didn't see the movement in terms of the pecking order for goaltenders. So I figured, okay, this is my time to move on to the next chapter. And really a friend of mine that believed in me, it's actually my former college captain, Ted Drury's father-in-law. His name is Dan Berkery, big TV guy in Boston. He got me just this production assistant job at CNN SI. And, I was just there making $12-13 an hour and, in helping to prepare things for the host because CNN SI at the time was like Sports Center. And then eventually the plan is you use their facilities to make some type of a tape, a reel. And then you choose either sports or news. You go small market and see where it takes you. Well, I had just moved to Atlanta, great town. And I came home one night and I saw that Bill Gardner, who was working with John Forsland, Bill Gardner, the color analyst. And he had an opportunity to go to the team that was near and dear to his heart in the Chicago Blackhawks right before the regular season started. And so I just called Pete Karmanos, and Jim Rutherford was the general manager. And Jason Karmanos, my college roommate at Harvard, had just become the assistant GM. And I said, I don't know if you guys will consider me, but I'd love to apply for the job. I had done a little bit of color when I was a healthy extra in a Calder Cup run with, among others, Manny Legacy. And we had a very good team in Springfield. And I was, I didn't dress in the semifinals, so I did radio color. So at least I had that tape with Chris Kerber, the great Chris Kerber, who's long been doing super work with the St. Louis Blues. Can remember doing games with him at Hershey Park Arena. And I had done a couple of things, just not much, but a show I had with the Richmond Renegades in the East Coast League. But it came down to it. Pete Karmanos made a decision with, I think, a temporary facility in Greensboro. So you're building a new fan base. You could get away with, if you think he has potential, a color guy that has to sort of learn on the fly. And that's why I got the job. What would have happened with CNNSI, I have no idea. Sports news, where I would have gone, but the goal would have been to make a tape. But Pete Karmanos gave me an opportunity. He believed in me. And the coolest part was, I think it was just a year or two ago, Winnipeg was in town, and I was out to dinner with Paul Maurice, and Pete had done the same thing for him, making him an assistant coach and then eventually a head coach in Hartford. And we texted Pete and said, Pete, we're thinking about you. And he said some really nice things, how proud he was and is of both of us. So, but the way Carolina has become a great hockey market, an educated hockey market, there's no way you could get away with a TV guy with no experience. When I think about that first year, my first ever road game, now that this Nashville series has ended, was the first ever win in Nashville Predators history. And Nashville didn't do the game. It was in October of 98. David Karpa was playing defense for us at the time. Didn't like a call. Either there's a puck or a stick that broke the glass. It led to like a 15-minute delay. I had been out to dinner with Chuck Caden into the wee hours the night before. Way to go, Tripp. Way to prepare for your first ever road broadcast. And so we get that delay. And then I have to watch it for the next 15 years because it was on ESPN Classic and the Disney Channel, because Nashville didn't do TV. And it was the first win in the history of that outstanding franchise. How do you make yourself vomit? Go listen to yourself on that broadcast. And I've just been given this phenomenal opportunity back then by Pete to hopefully develop into a good commentator. And I just always keep that in mind and give it all I've got.
All right, Tripp, we really appreciate your time. So we're going to wrap up here with a little bit of rapid fire. The only rule here is that you have to answer the question honestly. All right, you ready?
Yeah, you got it, Frank.
All right, so the Carolina Hurricanes wrap up their season or their series in OT last night. What is Tripp Tracy's drink of choice to celebrate a win?
Not last night, because I had to come on with you guys bright and early this morning, and I got home at 2:30. But I think it would probably be dirty martini.
I like it. Olives? Do you go olives or no?
Blue cheese stuffed, and if they can even throw some jalapenos in there, that's been a new adjustment here in the last couple of years with from a buddy of mine in Pure, Michigan, where I'm from.
I like it. So name one thing that you're better at than Rod Brind'Amour.
Mojo.
So you're going to need to explain that.
Well, it was Bob's birthday, and Rod and I had, I can remember a lunch we had in beautiful Vancouver right near our hotel. And it was with, Rod has been incredibly impactful in cystic fibrosis in Western Canada. There's this wonderful woman that Rod has become lifelong friends with. So we were all sitting at lunch, And I had a crush on the waitress, and I was through a breakup. And Bob Brind'Amour, Rod's dad, is telling me I've got no pheromones. My pheromones are gone. She can feel it. And Rod, and this just came up too because I was talking yesterday, Frank, that I remember watching when Kate and William and had the royal wedding, and I talked to Rod's mom because I saw Pippa Middleton in her dress, and I said, I think I'm gonna ask her out. And Rod goes, no chance, no chance. Well, Rod is overachieved with his beautiful, wonderful wife, Amy. But toe to toe, Rod cannot match my mojo.
All right. So give me one word. Here's another close friend. You mentioned Jason Carmanos, assistant GM now, associate GM in Buffalo. One word to describe why he will help turn around the Sabres.
Mensa-like IQ.
I think that's 3 words, but okay. We'll
Mensa.
accept that.
Mensa.
Okay. I like it. So I believe it's your cousin, Jim Farley, is the CEO of the Ford Motor Company. What Ford is Tripp Tracy buying?
I'd love to give you one word, but it's a struggle right now. And I've been talking to Jimmy about it. Boy, what a job he's doing. No surprise to me. So proud of him. His mother was my godmother. He's been pushing me on this limited edition Bronco Warthog. There is a limited Mustang that I drove a couple of times in Michigan last summer. Who knows? Maybe if I save enough, I could get both. But Frank, it would be between those two, the Warthog that he's been pushing. That's the one he's been pushing, or the limited Mustang. Those are the finalists.
Very nice. Like the Warthog. Is there another blooper in your reel, aside from that first win in Preds history, that really makes you blush?
Yeah, this one is good. A few years ago, I remember, the first couple of years on the job, you're excited, you want to be dapper. So say 5-game road trip, you're bringing 5 suits. Now, years later, I'm lucky if I bring 2. And we had a trip through Arizona, Vegas, St. Louis, and Chicago. And I've got 1 suit and a slowing metabolism as I had hit the second half of my 40s. And we were down by the locker room, and John Forson and I at the time were walking up to just go to the booth a couple hours before game time. I hadn't seen Darren Pang all day. And all of a sudden, out of my left ear, I'm walking, by the club there in front of the Blues locker room. Tripper. And I just pivoted to say hello to Panger, and my pants split. I may or may not have been, there could have been a commando situation there. And so I got up to the booth, and I looked at John Forson and his sideburns, and I said, what do you think? Can I get away with this? It was right on the middle of let's just call it the middle of the rear line, right down the middle. And I had to go down to do a bench interview with Michael Furlan. And so my backside, it's cold in there too, by the way. St. Louis, one of the colder buildings. And my backside was totally exposed, Commandoville. And the whole lower bowl would have seen it. I had no other suit. And I said, John, can I get away with this? He said, no way. So I put on Lululemons. And so I finished the road trip with my suit, coat, shirt and tie, and Lululemons. The things you do to pivot and stretch for a great guy like Darren Pang.
Amazing. All right. 2 last quick rapid fires. When the pandemic is finally in our rearview mirror, where is Tripp Tracy going on vacation?
Sardinia.
Okay.
Sardinia for sure. I had a 4th of July there with like a second family for me where I'm from in Grosse Pointe. A buddy, close friend that we've been the closest in the world since we were 12, 13 years old. A couple of years ago, actually, after the conference final run, we went to Mykonos and then Sardinia. And I try not to tell all of my Italian friends this because the 90%, maybe 95% of my closest friends are Italian, Italian American. And it really is true. You know, there are two kinds of people, Italians and those that want to be Italian. I had been all over Italy on several occasions in my life. Sardinia is the cat's ass. It was simply unbelievable. So that's my spot.
All right. And speaking of spot, I'm going to put you on the spot. We need a prediction. Round 2, Hurricanes, Lightning.
Canes in 7, Frank. Biggest win of the regular season was late in April. Carolina, it was a Monday, Tuesday back-to-back in Tampa. They had dropped the first game. Alex Killorn had clocked Marty Necas. The division, the top of the division and home ice was in doubt. Carolina responded, and specifically their captain, Jordan Staal. You remember that battle with Yanni Gourde? And he scores the game winner in that game, and the Hurricanes then achieved something that they needed to, in my opinion. And that's home ice against Tampa. So it's going to go 7, and Carolina wins in 7.
In any normal year, Tripp, I might call you a homer, but in this year, can totally see it. The Hurricanes are right there. So thanks so much for joining us. Tripp, you were a fantastic guest. Please check out the Dig In with Tripp podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Tripp Tracy, thanks so much for joining us.
Frank, I've long been an admirer of your work. I know that you've just begun a new chapter, which I think is phenomenal because that requires guts, that requires self-belief, that requires digging in. And a guy of your talents will run with it like you're Usain Bolt. So thank you. It's a great compliment for you to ask me to come on.
All right, Tripp Tracy, love it. Love his passion. Man, I really like his honesty. Dougie Hamilton's going to be a fascinating one for me. Frank is, you know what? I think he's a really good defenseman, but you know, and I agree with Tripp's assessment. Jacob Slavin might be the most underrated defenseman in the National Hockey League. He is incredible, very important player on that team. And so I'll be curious to see what they do with Dougie Hamilton in free agency. You don't want to let him walk, but they might not want to pay him $8 million, and he might want $8 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's probably where the number starts. And I also think a team in Seattle would love to have a guy like Dougie Hamilton. So I think there's lots of teams that would be willing to pony up. I just don't know that they're going to get there with how far apart they are at the moment.
Yeah, well, if you're Dougie Hamilton, man, you go from a really good Carolina team that looks like poised to be in the cup chase every year to an expansion team. Like, that's great for the money, but is it great? Like, I wonder. It's
the 1 year you really have to cash in. Like his current contract was pretty good and paid him a decent number, but it sets him up in a totally different way for life. I think you have to take the security.
Yeah, potentially. But man, if you're making 6.5 instead of 8,
that's a lot. It's easy for us to say, but 6.5 and 8, it's $1.5 million a year times 7 or 8 years. Like, it's a lot of money.
But you think about after taxes and everything else, like, you know,
dude, are you like $10 million? Is that what you leave on the table to go play for a cup contender? Like, how do you know that the team in Seattle is good, or wherever you go is going to be no good?
Well, you don't know that, and I understand it. But to me, well, you do know that Carolina is competitive, and you can look back on your life. And to me, if you have $100 million or you made 80 in your career, unless you've got the worst financial broker, it ain't making a difference. It's your life is not changing by that extra 20 mil at that point. I just don't think it is. Like, you know, I don't think it is. You're how much more do you need to buy at the end of the day? Because you can't buy a championship and you can't buy the emotional joy you get from that. So if it was
a lot of money to leave on the table.
Sure it is. But if you're walking away from the opportunity to ever win again, that's tough too.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's get to, speaking of winning, Boston, New York. What's your prediction?
I'm going to say Boston in 7.
Boston in 7. Okay. I got the Bruins in 6. We have Carolina, Tampa.
Tampa in 7. I think that also goes the distance. And I could easily see Carolina winning that series, but I have to disagree with one part of Tripp's assessment. He said that he thinks Carolina's forwards get the edge. I think Carolina's defense gets the edge on depth. And I also think that Hedman just hasn't exactly been Hedman with his injury. They have the clear advantage in Tampa in net with Vasilevsky. And I just think Tampa's forwards depth and top end skill is just better.
Yeah. See, I picked Carolina to come out of at the start of the playoffs, and I'm completely contradicting myself after watching Tampa Bay. And, Kucherov showed absolutely no rust. You get a Hart Trophy winner like that, guy who can score almost at will in the NHL. You get him back in your lineup. I'm going to take Tampa in 6 in that one. And we also, we don't know the other 2 series yet. We know that Winnipeg's in. Well, we'll see what Toronto, Montreal, and then we'll see. I guess I'll give you who's taking on Colorado in the second round.
I think Vegas wins in Game 7.
Vegas wins. I wonder about no Pacioretty, no McNabb, now maybe no Reeves. Got the COVID protocol. I still think I'm going to agree with you and take Vegas because after their devastating Game 7 loss to San Jose, and they got Pete DeBoer. He never loses in Game 7, so I'll take Pete's streak to stay alive undefeated in Game 7s. Frank, busy week. I was being a little bit of a long one, so we'll cut out of here. That was the DFL Rundown. Reminder brought to you by Manscaped and the Lawnmower 4.0, gentlemen. You want the twig and berries looking good, feeling good? Well, go to manscaped.com. You'll get 20% off and free shipping when you use the promo code DFO21. I got the Lawnmower 4.0, and I'm telling you, it's a game changer. You're never nicking, you're never cutting. It is phenomenal. And as Frank likes to say, it's really a gift for your wife and girlfriend or your boyfriend as much as it is for you. Check it out, manscaped.com. Have a good weekend, Frank.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Seravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.